All right, as always, we begin with our quick fire round, 30 seconds each to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we pick up the conversation from there. So the state's monopoly on force, legitimate when accountable, tyrannical when unchecked. Where is the line? Rekha, Sharma-Crawford, please take the lead.
I think the line is where the courts are at this point. I think that there is nothing else stopping this administration from crossing the line, and they've shown that they're willing to do so. So I think at this point, it's the federal courts that are holding the line.
All right, Andrew Arthur, also known as Art. Your 30 seconds are out.
Yeah, when you talk about the use of force in our society, there's no doubt that when you talk about a democracy, the ability to use force is almost exclusively vested in the executive. And I agree with Rekha. We have a tripartite system. We have three branches of government. We have the executive, ICE. We have the legislative, Congress, and we have the judicial, the courts. And quite frankly, each of those will balance one another out to determine whether any use of force is appropriate or inappropriate. When we talk about the almost exclusive monopoly on force in the government, we're really talking about a situation where the government, you have the right to self-defense, but the government also has the right.
Of course. Dan Perry, wrap it up for us, the opening round.
A monopoly of force is legitimate as long as it's constrained by the law and by oversight. And by the principle of proportionality, and as long as it's accountable to the courts and the voters and an independent oversight, and it doesn't hurt if you occasionally have the ability to concede error. But when you have what looks like two successive cases of extrajudicial killings by masked men, ill-trained, operating with immunity, and a government responds with lies and calumny and then doubles down in utter indifference to public opinion and to basic decency, then it looks like you crossed the line from operating as a government to operating as a mob.
So, ladies, gentlemen, let's please feel free to interact from this point onwards. Let's begin the conversation from the point you've just made, Mr. Perry, both in the cases of Alex Petty and Renee Good. The dispute is not even over narrative, but over facts, meaning that someone is simply not telling the truth. If I am to be more blunt, someone's lying. Dan Perry.
Yeah, I mean, the people lying would appear there appears to be a monopoly of lying on the part of the federal government. And it's extremely, extremely inelegant. And frankly, it not only troubles me, it perplexes me because I'm not used to this level of, frankly, and forgive me, stupidity. I mean, when Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland, I have to say security in quote marks, goes out and calls the latest victim within minutes, I think, of the killing, a domestic terrorist. And when others talk about his alleged intention to massacre everyone present, when the videos right before our eyes show something completely different, I am stunned by this level of mendacity. And since I don't think it's stupidity, I have to conclude that it's a feature and not a bug, and they basically just want to upset their political opponents. And it's a bit of a risk because it carries a high price, and we see calls to impeach.
Ellie, I think Dan is conflating a couple different things. And, respectfully, I'm in a pretty good position to measure this because I've conducted congressional oversight, and I've worked in the executive branch, and I've worked in the judicial branch. I've worked in all three. In an incident like this, we wait until all the facts are done, till the investigation is completed before we determine whether or not the agents acted appropriately or inappropriately. Now, whatever the Secretary of Homeland Security may say or DHS spokesperson may say after the fact doesn't actually implicate whether these officers acted appropriately or not. I think it's crucial to separate out those two things, and I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Well, but I think there is a political component here with respect. I mean, how can you ignore the fact that a very important, one of the 2 or 3 top federal figures involved in all this clearly rushed to judgment and issued what looked like libelous calumny that was completely indefensible given what we all saw on video. Would you be prepared to concede that that was at the very least unwise?
But Dan, that becomes a political issue. That's not a law enforcement issue.
Please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Before we take this in a different direction, we have to keep in mind that this is an administrative code enforcement civil action. Like, this is not the same as law enforcement in its truest form. So I think that it's unfair to say that, you know, the Attorney General is going out there, or even Kristi Noem is going out there and trying to control what the perception is. I think what it is an actual attempt to create a narrative that is consistent with their propaganda, which we've always seen them to do. The video footage is the video footage. This is a code enforcement agency that is acting in a way that even law enforcement is not authorized to act. And I don't think we can lose that in the narrative.
Art, please chime in.
Yeah, I mean, this is plainly civil enforcement, although to a degree it may also be criminal law enforcement. But it is one of those things where proportionality, as Dan referred to, the right to use force in that instance is one of those things that's generally determined after the fact. You have to separate out the political noise from whether or not those officers acted appropriately. And if they felt that in some way they were endangered, the line blurs. I mean, there is no line anymore. Self-defense by officers is self-defense, and they have the right to use it. Again, I would advise not to rush to judgment on any of these things. I don't agree with Kristi Noem rushing to judgment. I don't agree with anybody else rushing to judgment. Wait till the facts are done. This is hard work. It's difficult to figure out what happened in an incident. Well, you could say, oh, I looked at the video and I know what happened. I'm probably the only person here who's ever taught Fourth Amendment law, taught use of force. And even I'm going to sit and wait until I get the final judgment.
Actually, I would disagree with that. I'm a former prosecutor. So I'm very, very well aware of the Fourth Amendment. But I think that what you just said is fundamentally incorrect, which is the use of force isn't an after-the-fact analysis. It's a before-the-fact analysis. You won't go into something and say, I mean, they are trained on how and when to use excessive force. The policies are there. You get trained on it before. You don't get trained on it after the fact or in the middle of battle. That's not how that works. And so every
and I agree with that. But the fact is, whether it was correct or whether it was not correct is an after-the-fact determination. Whether it was not or was reasonable, prosecutor, for you to use that force in that instance. I don't disagree with you. Training is crucial, but whether it was appropriate or not is one of those things that is a forensic analysis done after the fact based upon the reasonable fear that they have.
You know, I with due respect to both of your experience in the law, I think it's fair enough to also speak as a citizen and as a human being. Tens of millions and hundreds of millions of us have seen those videos, and whereas I'm not saying rush to judgment at the level of convicting anyone, I am certainly saying that the videos suggest something very, very strongly, something that almost obviously contradicts the narrative being put forth by the officials at hand, who are themselves the ones who are rushing to judgment. And may I also add, you can get lost in the weeds sometimes, and it isn't such a terrible idea to zoom out a little bit and see the big picture. This isn't just about these two killings, horrific and indefensible, though I assess that they were, but the entire modus operandi of ICE, which could have deported the same almost 400,000 people that they have deported or turned around, minus a few, and not gone the extra step of the egregious cases of detentions of 5-year-olds that have never seen another country, or of 20-year-olds that don't remember where they came from, or of non-convicts sent to horrific jails in Central America for maximal security, and of the home violations and beating up people and pepper spraying people. It's so clear that when this is done with the president more than hinting that these are moves aimed specifically at not just sanctuary cities, but Democrat-run cities, there has been a total blending together of legitimate law enforcement and very legitimate border security, which I'm the first to support, and what looks like, I hate to say it, but like I said before, the actions of a mob.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right.
There are so many. Go ahead.
Please, Rekha. Yeah.
No, I think part of the problem is that what makes it look and feel so much like an actions of a mob is that they continue to act in a way which enforces warrantless arrests. They have tried to say that they have the authority to go into people's homes without warrants. They basically said the Fourth Amendment does not apply to them. And with respect, I just don't think that's a good look for the government. And it's certainly not inconsistent with what the Constitution allows. And I think that local law enforcement and local communities should be pushing back hard against that question of whether or not this kind of action is permissible or even acceptable or even reasonably objectively reasonable in these communities. And I don't think it is.
Art, please. Yeah.
Ellie, I got to respond to all this. There's so many straw men here. I feel like I'm in a high school production of The Wizard of Oz. We talk about the arrest of a 5-year-old. There's actually a discussion as to whether or not that 5-year-old was abandoned by his father. When we talk about warrantless arrest, counsel, you know that warrantless arrests are permitted under the Fourth Amendment, and they're permitted under the Immigration and Nationality Act. We throw these words around like they're shibboleths, like, they're scare words that they mean things. In reality, they all have legal terms, and they're all legally appropriate when they are done appropriately, which, again, is why we have courts. It's why we have congressional oversight. We have a government accountability office. We have 7 different committees of jurisdiction. We have an active press. And unfortunately, I think a lot of that active press, as more than a few people today, are taking one side of this issue rather than looking at immigration enforcement. This is a simple issue. If Minnesota were to allow ICE into its jails, none of this would be going on. ICE doesn't want to be out in the streets in minus 16-degree weather looking for people. They don't. And quite frankly, it's incumbent upon the government of Minnesota and Minneapolis to provide for security. They didn't. They pulled back security, which is why you have so many immigration officers in Minnesota right now. They have to protect the officers who are carrying out the actions, and then they have to protect the people who are protecting the officers.
Right,
this is one of those situations where I'm going to go to the book of Job and say, come, let us reason together.
It's quite amusing that you use the Wizard of Oz analogy. I'm not on that side of the state line. I'm not in Kansas. I'm actually on the Missouri side. But I will tell you that it is very much like the little man in the booth pulling the levers. And so the imagery of a big and great wizard is really not what it is. What you have is you have rogue code enforcement agents running around who have been told that they have absolute immunity to act with any kind of forces they want. They have been told that that even though the statute does have specific requirements on when a warrantless arrest may be made, and there's 2 specific things they have to be able to show under that statute. It's not whenever we want, which is what it's being utilized as. So, I mean, yes, the law is clear on when a warrantless arrest can be made, but that's not what's occurring. What you're seeing is you're having people go out, and I mean, if they knew who the individual was, which is one of the things they have to identify in a warrantless arrest, they wouldn't be arresting U.S. citizens. They wouldn't be shooting without any kind of provocation. They wouldn't be doing any of those things. The 10th Amendment is very explicit that powers that are left that are not specifically delegated to the federal government or prohibited by the Constitution are left to the state and the people. And right now, the state of Minnesota and the people of Minnesota are telling the federal government to get out. And that is something that they are not abiding by. And if they were doing enforcement in any kind of objectively reasonable way, I think you would see that would be an acceptable thing. That's just not happening.
We'll get further into this tension, inherent tension between the federal power and state sovereignty in a second. But Dan Perry, as for the policy itself, is it working?
Look, you'll hear some people say, and I'm sure Art would contradict this, that Obama was a champion of deportations, as if that is something to be proud of, and that Trump has deported surprisingly few. I'm not sure I buy that. That has to do with definitions and whether people turned around at the border count or don't count. I look at the bigger picture. If we know what it looks like when a government is trying to spread terror and create disunity, and we know what it looks like when they're trying to restore decent karma. And when I see the government doubling down on everything ICE does, refusing to concede the tiniest error, having their supporters like Mr. Arthur over here shamelessly blaming the local authorities and suggesting that ICE doesn't want to be out in the icy streets and this is somehow forced upon them by restrictions created by Governor Walz and the local Mayor Fry. I mean, it is laughable. We all see what's going on. Enough of it is caught on video. I know what it would look like if they wanted to do this reasonably. And it's very, very clear to me that the entire political edifice built around ICE, including the rapid doubling of the force with minimal training that was guaranteed to lead to this, is a dog whistle to the MAGA base.
All right. Art, in 20 seconds before we take a very short break.
Yeah. I mean, quite frankly, I could draw a direct line between the February 5th memo that was issued by AG Keith Ellison and the action that's taking place right now in Minnesota. And when you use dog whistles and things like that, it's offensive. You know, this is one of those situations where the local authorities could help or they can hinder. Right now, they've chosen to hinder, which is why ICE is in Minnesota right now.